Imagine like powering your home with sand, and your car with like used French fry oil,
Yeah.
and even pulling electricity out of thin air. Okay, maybe not all that's like on the menu tonight,
Huh.
but we are diving deep into the world's energy landscape. Buckle up because it's a wild ride of challenges A&D solutions you might not expect.
What's fascinating is how energy underpins every facet of our lives, yet most of us just take it for granted until the lights go out.
Yeah, totally.
This deep dive aims to give you a clear picture, not just of how we get power, but like the forces shaping its future and your role in that future.
And we've got some seriously cool stuff to unpack. A Sahara Desert solar farm visible from space. A city in Vermont running entirely on renewables. Even abandoned oil wells in upstate New York causing trouble.
Whoa.
It's all connected. So let's start with that fossil fuel legacy, the
Yep.
one we're trying to break up with but just can't seem to shake.
It's a powerful way to put it. Fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal have been the dominant force for over a century. They quite literally fueled our modern world. But as we know, that comes with a hefty environmental price tag. And it's not as simple as just switching to renewables because the past keeps haunting us.
Right. That BBC article about abandoned oil and gas wells in upstate New York blew my mind. Leaking methane in residential neighborhoods, who knew? You think of oil fields being out in the middle of nowhere, not right where people live.
It really brings home this invisible legacy of fossil fuels. And methane, as that report highlighted, is no joke. It's a greenhouse gas many times more potent than CO2. So these leaks aren't just a local issue, they impact the whole planet.
Okay, so we need to plug these leaks ASAP, right? But from what I read, it's not a quick fix.
Exactly. It's slow, it's costly, and the source even mentioned potential explosions during the process. It makes you appreciate how complex and intertwined our energy systems are. Even as we move toward a cleaner future, dealing with the remnants of our fossil fuel past is a huge part of the equation.
So it's not just a clean break, more like a messy divorce with a lot of loose ends to tie up. But speaking of cleaner, let's get to the renewable revolution. This is where things get really exciting. And it's way more diverse than just wind and solar farms, right?
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the familiar, but the innovation happening in renewables is mind-blowing. Before we get to the specifics, though, it's crucial to understand the core difference between renewable and non-renewable sources, not just their definitions, but what that practically means for our energy future.
I'm with you, definitions are boring, but knowing the pros and cons of each, that's where the interesting decisions come in. Like, what are we good at N and W versus what needs more work to become truly sustainable?
You've hit the nail on the head. So renewables like solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal are constantly replenished by natural processes. They're generally cleaner, but can be intermittent. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. Non-renewables, your fossil fuels are finite. We're literally burning up millions of years of stored energy. That makes them reliable, but with major environmental downsides.
So in a way, it's about balancing those strengths and weaknesses,
No.
right? But some of the stuff we're seeing in the sources feels like it's straight up sidestepping those limitations. That sand battery in Finland, storing heat for months using just sand. That's just wild.
It really highlights the ingenuity at play here. And it's not just fancy tech either. Sometimes it's about clever repurposing, like capturing waste heat from the London Underground to heat nearby buildings. That's thinking outside the box, A&D, reducing reliance on traditional sources.
It's giving new meaning to underground energy, right? But with all this amazing stuff popping up, the big question is, can we actually scale these solutions up to power the entire world?
And that's where things get tricky. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, reports paint a pretty stark picture. To hit climate goals, we need to triple global renewable power capacity by 2030. That's a monumental task requiring a complete overhaul of how we produce, distribute, and consume energy.
Okay, triple by 2030. That's not that far off. So what needs to happen to get there? Is that even realistic with current technology and investment?
It IDs realistic, but it requires a massive collaborative effort. Think Manhattan Project levels of focus, but for clean energy. The good news is the IEA also reports that renewables are becoming increasingly cost competitive, often cheaper than fossil fuels in many regions.
So it's not just good for the planet, it's good for our wallets too. That's a powerful motivator. But even if we build all these wind turbines and solar panels, how do we manage a grid designed for fossil fuels which are constantly on current versus things like solar that depend on, well, sunshine?
That's the crux of it. We need a fundamental shift to smarter, more flexible grids. Think energy storage solutions like batteries and pumped hydro plus AI-powered systems that balance supply and demand in real time.
So imagine a grid that's constantly adapting, pulling energy from different sources as they become available.
Yeah.
That's some next level stuff. But speaking of diverse sources, we can't forget the debate around nuclear power.
Right.
Some see it as a necessary evil, others as the key to clean energy.
It's definitely a complex issue. While traditional nuclear plants have their downsides, newer technologies like small modular reactors offer potential solutions. They're safer, more efficient, and could even recycle nuclear waste. It's important to consider all options on the table, weighing the pros and cons carefully.
And that leads us to a real-world example of what's possible. Burlington, Vermont, this small city in the U.S., is already running on 100% renewable electricity. That's got to be inspiring for anyone feeling overwhelmed by the scale of this transition, right?
Burlington's success story is a fantastic example of what can be achieved with a mix of resources and community buy-in. They've got wind hydro solar A&D, a sustainable biomass plant using local wood waste.
Wait, hold up. Burning wood for energy. How's that clean or sustainable? Doesn't that contribute to deforestation and air pollution?
It's all about responsible sourcing and technology. Burlington's plant uses leftover wood products. Think branches, treetops, damaged trees. Stuff that would otherwise decompose and release methane anyway. And modern biomass plants have filters and scrubbers to minimize emissions.
So it's like giving those wood scraps a second life as energy instead of letting them go to waste. That's pretty cool. But can every city just copy Burlington's blueprint and go 100% renewable?
It's not that simple. Unfortunately, Burlington has a unique set of resources: abundant hydropower, strong community support, and a relatively small scale. But their story proves that a complete transition is possible and offers valuable lessons for other communities.
It's a great reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and every region will need to find its own mix of renewables. But what about industries where going green is super tricky? Like, how do you make a jumbo jet run on sunshine and rainbows?
You've touched on a crucial point: what we call hard-to-abate sectors. These are industries with unique energy demands, making them difficult to decarbonize. Aviation is a prime example, as our source from Delta Airlines highlighted.
Right, they're still heavily reliant on jet fuel, and battery technology just isn't there yet for long-haul flights. You're not going to power a 747 with a laptop battery. But the Delta folks seem surprisingly optimistic about finding solutions.
They're definitely not sitting idly by. One promising avenue is sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. It can be made from things like waste cooking oil or agricultural residues, and some versions are already being blended with traditional jet fuel.
So imagine fueling your flight with yesterday's French fries. That's a pretty cool visual. But given the sheer scale of the aviation industry, is SAF really enough to make a dent in their emissions?
It's a step in the right direction, but scaling up production is a huge hurdle. Delta used about 5 million gallons of SAF in 2023, but their goal is to reach 400 million by 2030. That's a massive jump, requiring investment in new technologies and infrastructure, as well as collaboration across the entire supply chain.
Wow, 5 million to 400 million. That really puts things in perspective. What are the biggest challenges they're facing in trying to bridge that gap?
One is simply the availability of feedstocks. You need a lot of used cooking oil to make that much SAF. There are also technical challenges in converting those feedstocks into usable fuel and ensuring that the final product meets strict aviation standards.
So it's not just about finding alternative sources, it's about making sure those sources are reliable and can be produced on a massive scale. But it's good to know that airlines like Delta are taking this seriously, rather than just greenwashing their image.
Absolutely. And it's not just about SPAF. There's also research into electric and hydrogen-powered planes, though those are further down the line. The key takeaway here is that decarbonizing aviation is a multifaceted challenge, requiring a mix of solutions and a long-term commitment to innovation.
Speaking of innovation, remember that Royal Air Force flight powered by cooking oil. It's not a long-term solution, obviously, but it proves that we can think outside the box and push the boundaries of what's possible.
It's a fantastic example of that can-do spirit that we need to tackle these challenges. And it brings us back to our initial point. The future of energy is as much about ingenuity and collaboration as it is about technology.
I love that. It's not just about finding a magic bullet. It's about working together to create a more sustainable energy system for everyone. So what does that look like on a global scale?
Well, the IEA reports highlight the need for massive investment in renewable energy infrastructure, smarter grids, and research into new technologies. But it's also about policy changes, international collaboration, and individual action.
Okay, so it's not just about governments and big companies. It's about all of us doing our part. But what can one person really do to make a difference in such a complex system? It can feel overwhelming, right? Like I swap out my light bulbs for LEDs, but does that really matter when there are coal plants churning out emissions?
Every action has a ripple effect. Individual choices contribute to larger trends. Think about the rise of electric vehicles. But you're right, policy changes are crucial. Things like carbon pricing, renewable energy subsidies, investing in public transport. These create the framework for a systemic shift.
So it's about voting with our wallets, A&D, our votes, making sure our leaders are taken seriously. But one thing that keeps nagging at me, a lot of these solutions seem geared towards wealthy nations.
Yeah.
What about developing countries that are still trying to get basic electricity access to everyone? Can they leapfrog the fossil fuel phase and go straight to renewables?
That's a critical point, and one that our World Economic Forum source touched on. Energy access is fundamental to development. Education, healthcare, economic opportunity. It all relies on having reliable power. And forcing developing nations to follow the same polluting path we took is not just unfair, it's unsustainable for the planet.
Right. It's like telling someone, hey, you can't have a car until you invent a flying one. So how do we ensure this energy transition benefits everyone, not just those who can afford the latest tech?
It requires a global effort, and that's where things like the Green Climate Fund come in. Wealthier nations have a responsibility to support developing countries with technology transfer, financing, clean energy projects, and building capacity. It's not charity, it's a shared investment in our collective future.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about creating a level playing field, not leaving anyone behind.
Yeah.
But even with the best tech and policies, there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't fully addressed our own behavior right.
Exactly. We can't just keep consuming energy at the current rate and expect renewables to magically solve everything. Efficiency and conservation need to be part of the equation. Think smarter building design, reducing waste, even shifting our consumption patterns.
So it's not just about where our energy comes from, it's about how much we use, period. Do we really need to leave the lights on in every room, crank the AC to Arctic levels, or fly across the country for a weekend getaway?
Those are the tough questions we need to be asking ourselves. It's about shifting our mindset from abundance to awareness. Energy, is precious, and using it wisely benefits not just the environment, but our wallets too.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from abandoned oil wells to sand batteries, cooking oil planes to the future of the grid. It's clear this energy transition is complex, multifaceted, and frankly, kind of mind-blowing.
And it's happening and now, whether we're fully aware of it or not. This deep dive was just a glimpse into the forces at play, but hopefully it's given you, our listener, a clearer understanding of the challenges and the incredible solutions emerging.
If you're feeling inspired to learn more, definitely check out the full source material linked in the episode description. There's so much more to explore, and we'll be doing more deep dives into specific aspects of this energy transition in future episodes.
And as you continue learning, remember this: the future of energy isn't predetermined. It's being shaped by choices made every day by governments, by companies, and by individuals like you. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged, because your actions, no matter how small they seem, can contribute to a brighter energy future for all.
Beautifully said. Until next time, keep diving deep, and let's power up the future together.